Hello. Thank you. The Maverick of the day.
I'm going to ask you the first question. Guillermo wants us to bombard him with all kinds of questions. So I just wanted to know how you came to filmmaking.
Oh, okay, well, it started when I was about 8 years old, and my father had a Super 8 camera, and I realized that he was shooting us, the family, and it was a horrible revelation because I started behaving differently, first of all, hiding the corpses somewhere else. But also, what happened was that I realized when I saw that film developed and I saw us in the screen, I realized films were done by human beings. Before that, I just thought they were there, like fruits or animals or the sky. They just simply existed. And when I saw the terrifying realization that my father had done a film, I wanted to undo that injustice into the world and start at least trying to do a better job than him. I grabbed the camera and I started doing very bloody little stories with my Planet of the Apes toys, and they were stories about submission and sadism, and I didn't even know those words back then. And they were we created little special effects, clay human figures filled with ketchup that we threw from the roof and filmed them while exploded. Very constructive. At the age of 8, I was already twisted beyond salvation. So I continued doing these movies until I turned 15 and I got my own camera, and then I unleashed the series of Super 8 masterpieces that I have viewed recently, and I'm seriously considering burning them all. And I reached my biggest super production with an epic of 20 minutes on Super 8, 2 reels, and an incredible movie in which my mother played both a crippled and a fetus that strangled each other in a ballet of dead. That's how Midnight Madness would announce it. And then you would go, what a piece of crap that is. But that's how I started. And from that age, at 15 on, I started trying to work more professionally. My first job in a movie, paid, was in a movie shot by Jaime Humberto Hermosillo, who was also my screenplay teacher. And it was digging a tomb, digging a grave for one of his films called Corazón de la Noche, Heart of the Night. And I assisted with the various freaks in the movie that appeared, people with burns and blind people and all that. And I was like a gopher in that movie. But those essentially are the beginnings. I also studied makeup effects to do my own effects in my own movies because no one was making them in Mexico back then. And the people making them were doing it very rudimentary. So I realized I could do with the same materials and try to do my own effects. And I started making a living doing that for other movies while I directed my own. And that's the beginning. Now if you would be so kind as to ask any questions about either Kronos, Mimic, Devil's Backbone, or any project coming. Colin?
Okay. I mean, going from Cronis, which is something that you had much control over, to suddenly doing Mimic, which was shot here in Toronto. Mm-hmm. How did you find such a quick progression to control to maybe not so much control? How was your experience with that?
It was not. What happened is the progression on the films I've done. The last film I had done before Kronos was a short, a 30-minute short called Doña Lupe, about an old lady that killed the policeman in Mexico. And jumping from that to Kronos was an enormous feat. I mean, truly, I never even thought. I am like the Forrest Gump of filmmakers. I just never fully realized what was involved. And I jumped into making a feature, and it was a huge leap. And the main change for me from Kronos to Mimic was to come from an industry where films are made out of love into an industry where films are made out of power. And that is a huge change on the politics that are involved in making a film and how creation creative decisions are taken. But I think that, ultimately the process is very similar. The toy might be bigger, but it's exactly the same toy train. And what I say is in Mexico and in Europe, making a film is like having a small, very shiny, very beautiful toy train, and you have 4 friends over to watch you play, and they give you ideas and help you set the rails. And in doing films in the industry, it's like having a huge toy train, much more expensive, much more shiny. You arrive and they unleash 5 bullies to play with you. Hey, these kids are gonna play with you. Hi, hello. It's a different, it's a completely different experience. But at the same time, what I learned and what I was forced to catch up with in doing Mimic served a really good purpose, and it was applied fully in doing Devil's Backbone. I don't think I could have shot Devil's Backbone had I not shot Mimic first. Even in terms of myself, it made me appreciate greatly the freedom of being able to do my own movies. And I was talking with Alfonso Cuarón, who had back then done Great Expectations. I called him and I said, seems like we both made movies about giant insects, Alfonso. And he said, well, yeah, I had this experience, it was tough, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you must realize that every time we do one of these, it's like having a cereal box of shit, and in the middle of it comes a toy, which is your own movie. And you have to take the advantage of that and not be pampered and not just do our own movies or big movies and go do our personal movies every time we do a big one, which is the free toy that comes inside. And we both did that. He is in the festival with Y Tu Mamá También, and I am in the festival with Devil's Backbone. So, that's what I learned also. Right after Mimic, I was preparing to shoot Devil's Backbone, and out came up Blade 2, and as every movie in Hollywood, it needed to go right now. And I said, well, you have to wait for a little Spanish movie I'm gonna do. Well, we can't, it has to go now. And it's one of the few instances in which one has the chance of kind of planning a career. And I said, if you want me to do that one, you'll have to wait for my Spanish movie to be done. Because that was for me the right order. And it was correct. I did Devil's Backbone and felt an enormous creative liberation. Enormous. And then I went and did, almost in a Catholic way, Blade 2. Not Blade 1, no, Blade 2. Which absolutely, I said, I'm going to concentrate on making it fun. I'm going to concentrate on making the images as good as I can and so forth. But it's not my screenplay. It's not my franchise. I'm going to make it an exercise, which is what ultimately was disappointing for me on Mimic. I was trying to make an art movie with giant bugs, and it was neither a great big bug movie, neither an art movie. So it came somewhere in between, and I realized that at least for a while I may be able to do these big movies as an exercise and practice, and the other movies, my personal movies, as expressions of myself. I hope that answered the question. Another question? Yes.
How did you get Kronos off the ground?
That is a very fascinating story because I planned Kronos in 1984. I started planning it in 1984, and I said to myself, I'm going to do Kronos, but no one can do the special effects. So I founded my own company to do the special effects 8 years later when I made it in 92. In Mexico, what you learn is if there are no roads, you bring out a huge machete and start making your own, So what we did is we built a little company geared towards making the effects in Kronos, which is what we did and then closed. And I started shopping it around, and nobody wanted to finance it. The government officials said, this is not an art film, it's a film about vampires. And I kept saying, that doesn't mean it cannot be beautiful and poetic and artistic and so on and so forth. But they couldn't see past horror. The horror genre, was I to learn, much to my dismay, is viewed by most people only a notch or two above porn. So it was quite a disappointment to find that. I was working in a movie called Cabeza de Vaca, which is a wonderful, wonderful Mexican film about an explorer, midnight madness for sure, and while working in that, I met the producer, and she realized I was very serious about this Kronos movie, and she asked me to read it. She did, and then we went through hell together. I mortgaged my house, sold my car, and I remember a horrifying anecdote, which was I was so broke that I was in the way to deliver my van to the car dealership where they were going to put it for sale, and I had, for anyone that saw the movie, the giant gears in the back of the truck, in the back of my van, the giant gears from the inside of the clock. And I was driving and I realized I don't have the money to bribe a policeman. I had just passed a red light and the cop was chasing me, and I said, I don't have the money to bribe him. I'm going to have to escape. Thank God in Guadalajara we don't have a helicopter, so in comes one of the most pathetic hot pursuits in the history of mankind. A guy with an old van and huge gears and a cop in a really crappy police car. But that was very exemplary of what happened. And essentially, I never made the money back as such. I mean, I did get a career, I did get to do other movies, but I lost $250,000 out of my own pocket. Back then, the interest in the bank in Mexico was 110%, which is as close to institutionalized rape as it gets, you know. So that's how it came to be. And then what was even more disheartening is after having it done, the movie, the government still didn't support it. The institutions saw it and they said, well, it's okay. And I was like, oh, but it's so beautiful and it's about vampires. And they didn't get it much. We got invited to Cannes, and they did not give us any official support to go to Cannes. So I said, well, it's a festival. I have been in the festival in Guadalajara. I think I can handle it. Let's get there with 20 posters and a roll of tape. Should prove more than enough. And I got to Cannes, and it was like entering a set of Babylon. And there I was with 20 posters and a roll of tape. So we decided, well, we better start sticking those posters fast. And you know, the first thing you see in terms of advertising when we arrived at Cannes was a 55-foot tall Arnold for The Last Action Hero, inflatable. I was a little daunted by it. Was a little daunting by that. And what I did is we put our posters and went to church. I said to my wife, I know I'm an atheist, but let's go and pray, because I think we're really f***ed. So we went to a little church near Cannes, and I did pray like a crazy man. I know I don't believe in you, but help me. And we won. And from that point on, everything changed. The movie, sadly, in Mexico, it was one of the countries where it was more poorly released because it was released by the exact same government institution, and they didn't support it on the release. So that's the story of Kronos.
Jorge Pica from CHRY Radio York. Guillermo, when you were here presenting Kronos 2 years ago,
Yes.
We talked about it, and we found exciting each other. We understood that we are, yes, we understood that we are collectors, big
Yes.
fans of comics.
Yes.
And you, in many ways, accept that comics is an incredible influence in your creation as a writer.
Yes.
Why don't you talk and develop a little bit the concept between what the north of this continent understand as comics and what we understand as historietas or tebeos
In
or
Mexico.
fumetos or whatever?
Well, evidently, the function is the industry of comic books in America was, at least for a while, a rich and buoyant industry, whereas in Mexico, like any other industry down there, was a precariously sustained industry. And it was geared in Mexico mostly towards melodrama, and mostly comic books in brown and white. It's like as if anyone said, what is the most disgusting ink we can find? And they found this brown ink, and they printed on this yellowing paper. And you had this depressing thought of death and the brief nature of life and looking at these comic books. But what also but it gives you, what comic books gave me was they could be outlandish without having a budget. And I did practice a little bit. I was not a very good comic book artist, but I was a good enough illustrator so I could venture into a couple of comic books myself with disastrous results. I still have a pile this big of my self-published comics that travels everywhere with me in the hopes of someday achieving some value, like $50, the pile. But what it gives you, comics at its best can be much more propositive and inventive and experimental than cinema even, because they have the chance of juxtaposing the written word and the agility and the fluidity of cinema in images. And yet, unlike cinema, you can detain yourself and look at an image with the utmost care. I craft the compositions in my movies as carefully as I would do with a painting. And yet, individually viewed during dailies, you go, that's a beautiful shot. But when you see them in the flow of the movie, rarely do you stop to admire a shot or say, that's a beautiful image. So what I say is we create great photographs that last only a few seconds or a second on the screen. And in comic books, the great thing is you can take your time and admire each one of those. And if you needed to consult, juxtapose, or refresh your memory, you just go back a page or two, and it's great. But I have found during the course of several years that very little, they have a lot in common, but very little can be translated from one medium to the other. They are like very close cousins, but they're not twins. And yet the love of comic books allows me to create, I think, outlandish images and strange stories that are a little more liberated and weird. I think certainly when you can think about a story where you go, I think I'll do a movie about a vampire insect that creates a vampiric old man that sleeps in a toy box. That is certainly influenced by comic books, I would say. Or the fact, just like in Devil's Backbone, where I say, I think I will do a story with a ghost juxtaposed with a war story as a canvas. It certainly is a little more free in the way I combine these things. And they sound so silly, and yet to me they make sense. I think that might be an influence of comics. Another question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You've talked a little bit about the constraints that you felt in the industry in Mexico and with institutions in the government there, but then you also referred to The Devil's Backbone, making that film as a feeling of great liberation. Yes. So I'd like to know how you came to write that story and where this liberation comes from.
Well, the first thing that was great, a hint of it was, it was 1994, and I was in the Miami Film Festival looking over a balcony at some girls in a bikini. Quite frankly, it was nothing much more uplifting than that. and in comes Pedro Almodóvar and says to me, are you Guillermo del Toro? And I say, well, yeah. It was Pedro Almodóvar talking. It was a very surreal experience. And he says to me, I loved Kronos. Whenever you want to do another movie and you want to do it in Spain, I'll co-produce it. Simple as that. And it remained up to now as simple as that, which was never the case in Kronos or the case in Mimic. What was great about Pedro is that he is exactly what you see is what you get. And the guy is almost a force of nature, but being a director, he's the ideal producer. He said, if you need me, I'll be there. If you don't need me, you won't even see me. And he was good to his word. The difference between Kronos and Devil's Backbone is I'm 36. In Kronos I was 28, and I had now the enormous experience of 8 years. 8 very tough years, mind you, but 8 years nevertheless, not much. But I feel I was better prepared to shoot that movie now. As a filmmaker, I have more tools. And as a filmmaker, I got absolute support from Pedro and El Deseo. And the fact that I was also a producer with my own company, Tequila Gang, You may fantasize about how we came up with that name. But we came up with the idea of doing Devil's Backbone. I wanted to do it before Kronos, 16 years. 16 years ago I wrote it, but back then it took place in the Mexican Revolution and in a Catholic orphanage. Then later, I found that financing that movie was almost impossible because the background of the revolution demanded bigger types of battles, and Mexico, I couldn't be more selective and say, I won't show this, I won't show that. And when I decided to shoot in Spain, I decided to find co-writers. I found these two co-writers that had a screenplay that we melded with my own and made a third one called Devil's Backbone. And I decided, not them, that it should be the Spanish Civil War for many reasons, some of which are that it's, in fact, a war that is fought indoors, so to speak. It's a civil war. And there was a case before the Spanish Civil War where you could have a table in a house where the father was a fascist, one of the sons was Republican, and the other one was a fascist. And you have them eating together, and years later they could kill each other. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible particular war about that. And so the microcosmos in the movie, which is indoors, which is in this little orphanage in the middle of nowhere, was a perfect metaphor for that bigger war outside. And like the orphanage, Spain was left completely alone in the middle of nowhere by most countries during the war. It was supported by China, Russia, Mexico, and a few idealistic North American young men from Canada and the States that traveled there. But France or England or officially the United States were not supportive of that, and thus it becomes a prelude of Second World War, because less than half a year after the war ends in Spain, Hitler takes Poland. And it was all these elements that made me want to do it situated there. And the reason why it was liberating is finally, for the first time in my life back then, I could concentrate on making a movie and not making a movie and trying not to lose my house and being chased by a cop with gears on the back. Any other questions?
What was it like working with the extremely talented young boy who played Carlos?
Well, working with kids is great, and it's hell, because they always have that PlayStation 2 in the other room, and they have that horrible itching of, is it good? Is it a good take? Can we go? No, but what is great about the kids is that when they're there as actors, they're there. It's real. The emotion becomes real. And also, if the kids have a good sense of the character, and you treat them like adults as opposed to treating them like kids, if you're not condescending, they respond like adults. Kids are terribly complex creatures while being very pure, and that makes them great, because you can talk to them very directly, very profoundly, and they understand and respond in kind. The kid that plays Carlos was his first movie. He came in. It was one of those moments in which I perversely enjoyed giving a happy day to someone else, and I planned it perfectly for maximum impact. He came in with his mother to read for one of the extra kids, one of the kids that says one line, or two. And he came in and read, and I said, this kid is going to be the lead. And I gave him a speech to memorize. He memorized it in 10 minutes. He came back, I tested him, and I said, come back tomorrow afternoon. He came back the day after. I showed it to Pedro and the other producers. They all agreed he was fantastic. He comes back and I tell him, you got a part, you got the starring role. And him and his mother were crying, and I was crying, and it was absolutely a ridiculously sentimental moment, but one of those that is great to give to someone else. That you're going to make him very proud, and you're going to make the mother very proud, and he was a delight to work with. After Devil's Backbone, he got immediately a starring role on the next Fernando Trueba movie that he's shooting right now, the Shanghai Spell, and I think he's off to a career as an actor. And he was so natural. He was such a great kid. Yes.
I was wondering if you could shed some insight with your experience in Mexico about how you make contact with some of the Mexican actresses. We have we have screenplay funding and all that, but we have been trying and calling Mexico, and we cannot make any headway with any Mexican actresses at all. So I was wondering,
Really?
what is the
I'll
secret?
tell you
or-
right now, there's no secret. There's some casting agents there. Claudia Baker is one, and she's supposed to make contact with all the actresses that you may want in your movie, you know? I mean, to the opposite, I think that Mexican actresses would love to have good roles to play. If in all the world there are very few good roles written for actresses, Mexico is, believe me, not the exception. You know, the country where the tequila and mariachi and the macho were invented is not exactly fertile ground for great female parts. So let's talk after. It will be quite easy, I hope. Question? Colin, you know you will.
After Kronos and on your way to Mimic, there were various projects that your name was attached to, which seemed quite possible. But then you went on to do Mimic. I'm curious to know what happened with Hellboy. And also your name was attached to the adaptation of the Japanese comic Domo.
Domo. Yeah. Well, I've developed several screenplays. You know, when you arrive to Hollywood, they tell you, we want, this is great to meet you. Later, you know, it's bullshit. And first, A, it's not great to meet you. B, they probably haven't seen your movie. You know, it's like that agent that Martin Short plays in a movie. I haven't seen your movie, but I've heard great things about it. Like, I want to be your agent. It's like that. And when I arrived first at Hollywood, they would say, "Oh, we're huge fans." Well, I have done one movie. What can you be a fan of? It's one movie. But well, they say, "Oh, we're big fans, and we would love you to give us a real different horror story." Man, that sounds very challenging. And you go ahead and you write them the most different horror story you can, and they crap in their pants. And they say, couldn't you make it more like Scream? It's a bit, it's like when I turned one of my screenplays, it was a haunted house movie where the house itself was a thinking organism. And I turned it to Fox, and they say, yeah, we like it, but we're not into this right now. Don't you have anything with witches? Because we're looking for a movie about witches, and they sure enough went and did, I think, The Craft or something like that. But it was like a fast food window. I want 3 Big Macs and 1 movie with witches. Yes, sir, I'll prepare it right away. Will you like that with mayo? It's fantastic how. Or another instance of what happened was when I got offered The Exorcist 4, I said, well, I would like to call it The Exorcist Chapter 4, Versicle 1, like in the Bible, 4:01, 01. And I said, I pitched the idea, which was to see Father Merrin as a young man and so forth, and really set it in the Vatican, which was a little perverse. And then they said, well, this sounds interesting, but the only thing is, can it not have an exorcism in it? Because the last one was really crappy with the exorcism. I go, but it's called The Exorcist. What do you want? No, think about it. Yeah, I'll think about it. Goodbye. But it's like that. So that happens with the projects I have developed. Most of them are still, I keep them as personal projects, and they have become so personal as Devil's Backbone is personal, but they're pretty risky. And of course, when the time comes, I'll try to make them. But in the instance of Hellboy, which I call spiritual autobiography, it's such a big film that I am afraid to go at it, since it's a $70 million big movie, but it's so personal to me. So in the meantime, they live in my little notebooks that I keep, and I keep the little, and they are there, and they're better than the movies if they f up with them, and they're safe. And that's the way I deal with it is I travel with my notebooks that become like a catalog of images, and they're there for the pillaging if I need to. But it's better that than to risk to screw them up through the machinery. I think that it's very one of the things that both Alfonso and I felt was very good to do with our movies that we do in Hollywood and the others is to make it clear that people do not need to see Hollywood as an end. A lot of young people see Hollywood as, I made it. And they should think of it as a tool and use it. And if possible, don't let it use you, because it's really fast and really easy to get lost in there. And Alfonso and I made that conscious decision of let's put that out there, that we can do our own movies and not be spoiled by the limo at the door and the craft service. Craft service was a big temptation in my case, But hey, in Spain there's great jamón. So what can I say? Any other questions?
I have another one. You've just flashed us the notebook, which just looks like a treasure trove of images, and I wondered if you could talk about when you're crafting your stories, is it the image that dictates to you the rest of the stories, or the story that comes first and then the images circulate? If you could talk about that process a bit.
The images are first, no doubt about it, but in the case, for example, of Devil's Backbone, they came at the same time, because I felt it was really good to try to make a ghost story that talked about ghosts in every shape or form. Things that never happened, childhoods that got lost, futures that were not taken, love stories that were not concluded. All of that and the war itself were ghosts to me, and I wanted very much to make a ghost story that was like that could achieve some meaning in all those little forms. And obviously the central image of the ghost, I don't know how many of you actually saw that movie, but it was so beautiful to me. That little ghost that seemed to be underwater, even outside the water, and like a porcelain doll, that it kept it alive for 16 years. For 16 years I was wanting to make the movie. Although in the original story it was not a ghost but Jesus that chased the boy around. It was a very strange thing, because I had this crucified three-armed Christ in that little orphanage, and it came down the cross and chased that kid through the corridors like a spider. I wonder why he never got mail. Questions? Questions when? There you go. No.
I have one. In both Kronos and The Devil's Backbone, they both feature relationships between the very young and the very old. I wondered if you could talk about what interests you about that.
Even on Mimic, and even involuntarily on Blade 2, I have no idea what this. Evidently, I have something in my childhood that could be easily spotted, but it always ends up being stories of fathers and sons in a strange way, surrogate fathers and surrogate sons in a way, or daughters in the case of Kronos. But I find the thing that I have is I have no understanding of youth and no patience for winners. I hate winners. Most of the time, even on Blade 2, I made the decision of accepting that story because Blade is himself a freak. He's a guy that lives in the dark, that injects a serum, that lives in abandoned warehouses. He's not Superman with that f***ing flashy smile and the bright colored uniform, that is in favor of everything good and apple pie. It is just, I don't understand youth. I was never young. I believe I was 70 at the age of 5, and I've been progressively grown older. And I understand the extremes. I was a child, and the most vivid memories I have are of my childhood. And I understand the feeling of being old, since some of the people that were my best friends or really close to me when I was a child were old. And I understand that both ages are usually disfranchised, and they're usually losers in the social game of life. Children essentially no one pays attention to them, and when they do, it's only to overprotect them and treat them like invalids. And I find that horrifying, and the same is true for old people. When people ask me about, for example, they tell me if I'm not worried about portraying violence with and towards kids, and I wonder what kind of childhood these people had, and if really I'm truly a freak of nature. Because one of the things that struck me the strongest being a child was the imminence of death at every step of my childhood, by the hands of other children or by pure carelessness. I mean, as children, we used to play with jugs of gasoline and matches, unsupervised. And I mean, we were not killed or maimed by mere luck. And by the same token, I have seen the most savage, brutal, and violent fights ever seen by any man in the school courtyard, in the schoolyard. And I knew that those bullies that inflicted those fights onto the younger ones, that turned from fist fights to stone fights to stick fights in a matter of seconds, could kill and did injure seriously many of the kids. And the moment an investigation came upon it, they would say, we were just playing. And there was nothing made about it. And the next day, the injured kid would be again facing the same bullies. That's why I'm attracted to those ages. The same is true for an old man or an old woman. When they say something, it's like they're old. It's immediately disqualified. So I'm very attracted, as you may see if you saw or if you saw the movie Devil's Backbone. What I like is to have a band of sort of disfranchised people find out that the only thing that we have to hope for is each other. Being an atheist, even if I pray in Kronos, I know that the only thing we have to look forward to is the camaraderie and the proximity of others. And that's the idea in the movie, and I think that the two ages, the two opposites, are very capable of that connection.
What's your next picture?
Well, as I said, careers are not planned. They just happen. It's like, I wanted to do Devil's Backbone before Kronos. I wanted to do a movie called Mephisto's Bridge right after. And then I've been trying to do Monte Cristo. Yeah, I've been trying to do a Gothic Western version of the Count of Monte Cristo set in Mexico in the 1860s. And the Count is, essentially it's a Gothic Western, but the aesthetics of it are those of a horror movie. I mean, it's a Western that is a crepuscular, a word in English? Yeah, it's a crepuscular Western, all done in reds, blacks, and golds. And the Count becomes the fastest gunslinger in the West. He has a mechanical glove that he puts over his dead hand, and he has a band of 6 shooters on his chest made of gold. And he goes avenging himself in the manner of the novel. And the reason why we wanted to adapt that way was because the excitement of the Dumas novel had been lost over the ages. He wanted to do sort of a 1001 Nights type of story. And as it becomes a classic, all you get is this stodgy people doing a stodgy classic. And the excitement of the novel is lost. And hopefully, we're out to my unknown cousin, Benicio del Toro, hoping we will get him to play the Count. That's how dark I wanted, and if it succeeds, you will be in for some really creepy images. But Mephisto's Bridge is still around, and hopefully that will be my next movie. I've been trying to make that movie for 9 years. It's a Deal with the Devil movie in which you kind of take the side of the devil, and it's full again of beautiful and very disturbing images. But then there's anything can happen. Hellboy can happen, something like that.
Talk a little bit about camaraderie, relating back to the comments you made about children and whatnot, and then you also explained how you had to invent so much of what you needed to make your films on your own. But I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the people you drew inspiration from, whether directors or other craftspeople.
Well,
who influenced you.
in proximity, the example that I drew more inspiration from was originally my screenplay teacher, Jaime Humberto Hermosillo, who is also a very independent filmmaker and does really his own movies, his own way, and kind of taught me to maintain that independence as much as possible. But as filmmakers, I love Hitchcock, Buñuel, Lynch, Almodóvar. Two of them are not dead, so I hope to meet Lynch someday. And Cronenberg, and so on and so forth. And mainly, what I love is people that work in the fantastic genre, but try to do something a little deeper or a little stranger or a little more risky with it. Namely, George Romero, whose political allegories with Living Dead are so fantastic, allegories of the modern day America. I mean, to this day, I cannot enter a shopping mall without thinking about Dawn of the Dead and him saying they come back here because it was important in their lives. And I go, oh, I should be ashamed of myself. But, it's that kind of people, Cronenberg, trying and succeeding wonderfully in doing something else with the genre. And essentially that, I think that when you find a genre that is as despised as horror, and you make it your own, and you really work with a lot of love on it, and with a lot of care, whenever anything happens to be able to succeed to a degree, you are 10 times prouder. It's so much easier to make a good movie doing the life of Louis Pasteur, than it is to do it about giant cockroaches. Then, I think that being a fan of alchemy, I remember that the principle of alchemy, and for that matter, Catholicism, was to take vile matter and make it transcend. And as such, I try to do with what I love, because sadly or not, I am attracted to vile matter. I love it. Well, thank you very much, and I hope to see you see the movie. Thank you.